It's good to read the entire thing before you start, but if there are things that you can do without thinking, so right here, this is something really simple, right? We don't have to actually think about what's going to go in the code. We can just write it straight up how it says. Okay, so it says write a function called write weird file. Okay, so first off, how do we write a function? Well, to write a function in Python, we have to first define it, and to define it, we just write def. And you'll see here that def is highlighted in blue, and that signifies that it's a keyword in Python, which means it already has functionality to it. You don't have to do anything for it. It actually means that we have to add stuff to it, but it basically means that Python is expecting some information, and we have to give it. So def here means that we're defining a function. Okay, so it tells us, so after this, so after we define the function, so after writing def, we have to write the name of the function. So we'll write weird file, because that's what it says to call the, or that's what the function name is. Okay, so after this is gonna take some parameters. Okay, so what are parameters? Parameters are basically variables that let Python know what's supposed to go inside the function. So when you call the function, it's basically saying here's some information to use in the function. Okay, and they're basically the same thing as variables. Okay, so it says the first, so it should take two positional parameters. The first should be a file name. Okay, simple enough, file name. The second should be a list. Okay, easy enough as well. Then there should also be three keyword parameters. Okay, so first off, what is a keyword parameter? Okay, so remember I was saying before that these, like file name and list, these are basically just variables that Python so basically they're variables, and variables hold values, they hold information, and that information is going to be passed into the function when we call it. Okay, so when we call this function right now, we need to have at least two arguments for it. Okay, so two pieces of information for it. Otherwise, the function will error because it can't run. It needs this information to run. So what is a keyword parameter? A keyword parameter is something that is optional to give. And the reason it's optional is because it has a default value. So these first ones file name and list, they don't have an automatic value. So that's why you have to pass them in. But the question is saying, in case you don't want to pass them in, let's have some automatic modes. Okay, so automatic defaults for the variables or for the arguments that are passed into the parameters for the function when you call it. Okay, so the first one is mode. Okay, mode. So mode, sort first and reverse first. The default value for mode should be W. Okay, so easy enough. The way you write a keyword parameter, by the way, is it's really easy. You put the equal assignment operator, and then you just put whatever you want. So now when we run it, basically, let's say we just had these three. All we need to do for this function to work is pass in a string for the file name, or I mean just anything for the file name that's accepted by Python, and a list. Okay, we don't actually have to put anything for mode because it has a default value for W. So if we don't write it, it's okay. Python knows what to do. Okay, so then there should be sort first, and there should be sort last, or I'm sorry, reverse first. Okay, so then it says the default values for both sort first and reverse first should be false. So we do it the same way, equals false. And again, you see here that false is highlighted in blue. That means it's a keyword in Python. So basically, all you have to know for that is that it means something significant in Python, and so don't use that as a variable name. Okay, sort first equals false, and let's do reverse first equal false. Okay, so we can extend this a little bit. And to finish off saying that, okay, we're done writing this line, we write a semicolon to signify that we're done defining the function. Okay, so that's the first line of code. Now it gets into the part where we have to actually think of how to do the stuff. So this is where we should think before we write. So write weird file should contain the contents of the list to the given file name. So right there, when we're reading this, let's look for some keywords in the sentence. Okay, so write weird file. So already by the name, we can tell that we're doing something with a file, which means it's indicating that we're going to have to open some file. Okay. Another thing is it says write. Should write the contents of a list to the given name. So this tells us one of two things. It tells us that either it is writing to a file or it's appending to a file. Okay, generally this is just going to be write to a file, because most of the time they'll say append the contents to a file. So this one will just go with W, which is the default value. Okay. Okay. Write word file should write the contents of the list to the given file name. Each item from the list should be on a separate line. Okay, so that, what is that signifying to us? Okay, so it's actually right here. I'm saying, I'm sorry, that's not right, that's fine. So let's keep track of what we're doing. We're writing to a file, and then it says each item from the list should be on a separate line. So this tells me that we're probably going to need \n somewhere, because what that does is that adds a line break in the string. Okay, now let's keep reading. The list items could be strings, floats, characters, or integers. If the mode is W, it should overwrite the current contents. If the mode is A, it should append to the current contents. You may assume there will be no other value for mode. Okay. If sort first is true, it should sort the list before writing. If reverse first is true, then it should reverse the list before writing. If both are true, it should sort then reverse. Okay, so let's get into writing. Let's start with this. If sort first is true, it should sort the list before writing. Okay, so if sort first. Now when we say if sort first, basically an if statement, which is what we're writing here, is just looking for a true or false value. Okay, so if sort first. So sort first, remember, is representing some information because that's a variable. So if sort first is true. So if we write true, then this will be true, so it'll run. We don't have to write double equal true, because sort first is already holding the value of true or false. Okay, so if sort first is true, we want to sort the list. Okay, so we can say list dot sort, and what's it called? So we use the sort method, which what it'll do is it'll sort the list. Okay, now if where does it say? Should append, you may assume there will no other value. If sort first is true, it should sort the list before writing. If reverse first is true, then it should reverse the list before writing. Okay, so if reverse list, and again, it's the same thing. This represents some information, right? It's a variable. If it represents some information, and we don't have to write double equals true or however else you would say it, because it already holds a Boolean value. So if reverse first, we're gonna do list dot reverse. We use the method reverse. Okay, and there. Now it also says one more thing. If both are true, it should sort then reverse. Now because we did two if statements when we didn't do an else if statement, this already works. Okay, because it will run this no matter what, and if it's true, it'll do this. It will also run this no matter what and run this if it's true. Okay, so that's why we use two if statements rather than an if else. Okay, what's after that? Okay, write weird file should write the contents of the list to the given file name. Okay, so let's open the file. All right, so so basically when we open a file, there's something you need to do. You need to assign it to a variable, right? So we'll just assign it to file, so you know we can keep track. It's like I said before, you should name something like what it is, right? So we're opening a file, so let's call it file. Okay, so file is equal to open. To open a file, we say open, and then we put the file name, which this can be anything, but because we named the file name, or because we named a variable that represents the file name, that's why we write file name. So open file name, comma, and then on the other second, so open is a function. It's basically what we're writing, but it's a predefined function in Python, and it needs two arguments. We already went over one, which is the file name, and the second is the mode in which it's opening. So like I said, there's a couple. There's W, which is write, A is append, and R is read. The question says that we will not need read, so it's fine. And also one of the parameters or one of the arguments that's being passed into the function when we call it is the mode that we're opening it. So instead of writing an actual mode, like instead of writing open quotation W close quotation, we can just write mode, right? Because that's representing the mode that we're opening it in. Okay, so now the file is open, and now we can do stuff to the file. Okay, so now it says each item from the list should be on a separate line. And okay, so we're writing to the file, the contents of the list to the file. So what does that mean? So if we're writing, so we don't know what's in the file, right? Or maybe we do know what's in the file. We can look at the example. But let's say we didn't know what was in the file. We need something that works for everything. So we can iterate through the file so that we know what to write. Because if we don't iterate over the file, we need to know exactly what's in the file to write it. But because we don't know what's in it, we have to iterate over it to put everything, no matter what it is, inside the file. So for item in list, and let's go over this notation for a second. So for item in list, what is item? Why did I use item? You don't see item anywhere before it. Well, item is basically a variable that will take on the value of whatever is in list. So when you use a for loop, it's basically saying, so for each item in the list. So let's say the first item in the list, assign it to item and do something to it, run it through the code that's under this. And then after that's done, go back up and go to the second item and keep doing this until we get to the last item. We've done all the code for the last item. We've run it through the code under this for loop, or inside this for loop, okay? So for item in list, we want to write the contents of the file. So how do we do that? Basically we say file, because remember the file is inside this variable file. So file.write, we use the write method, and file.write, and we basically write what needs to do. So item needs to go inside right there. Okay, so I think there might be something wrong with this, but we'll see, and I'll explain after. If there is something wrong, and after I'll explain why I might have thought something was wrong, but for now this is okay. So for item in list, file.write item. Okay, there. Now we've done that. Let's see what else there is. The list items could be strings, floats, characters, or integers. That's fine. It doesn't matter. If the mode is W, it should overwrite the current contents. If the mode is A, it should append to the current contents. It may seem to be no other value for the mode. Okay, so this is fine. Dot write is actually used for both append and write, so for W and A, so it should be right for now. Now let's close a file. So whenever you open a file, you need to close it. Okay, so now that we're done writing the code, let's do file.close, right? And remember, this could be anything. File is just what we named the contents of the file to, or what we gave the value of the contents of the file to this variable. So that's why we say file.close, right? If we name this files, we have to write files. Okay, it's just that's signifying what it is. Okay, so now let's run it before we submit it to see what we get. Okay, so there is some error. Let's see what the error is. So it tells us on line 27. Let's go to line 27. What's wrong? If reverse list. Name reverse list not defined. Okay, so reverse list, yeah. Okay, so here's the problem. I actually named this reverse list when it's supposed to be reverse first. Okay, because it's supposed to be the same thing as this, and that's the point of writing those argument names. Okay, now there's another problem. Okay. Okay, write item must be string. Okay, so this is fine. What we need to do for this is basically, okay, let's go over what it's saying. So it's a type error. The right argument must be a string, not an integer. Okay, so or any other value. So what we do is we just say item is equal to string of item. We just turn it into a string. Now if we run it, that should fix that problem. Let's see if there's any more problems. Okay, so there's nothing here, which is good, right? Because we're not returning anything from the function. What we can go is we can open up the output, and let's see. There it is. But it says that everything should be on its own line. All right, so let's go back. All right, so what it should do is it should be like this. Everything should be in its own line. Whereas what we just saw, everything was on the same line. So everything was like this. So here's what we do. File.write item plus \n. Because remember I said keep track of this earlier. What does \n do? That adds a line break. Okay, so there is another way to do this without having that. So let's check this now. You use the print function, but because we did this way, it works. So let's go and let's see, because remember, that's just one case. We need to pass every case, every example case that the function gives us in order for this to be correct. So let's try that. Okay, Waiting for submission report. Well done. Okay, so we did